The fitted sheet was folded neatly, left on top of a plastic storage bin next to a water heater that clicked every 40 minutes through the night. There was a cot, the kind you buy for camping, and a single pillow in a case that didn't match. My brother-in-law was upstairs, in the master suite, in the bed I had picked out from a showroom in Asheville, with the linen duvet my wife had ordered twice because the first one was the wrong shade of white. He was up there with the lake view and the private deck and the sound of water I had listened to every summer for 14 years. I was in the basement. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am a civil engineer. I have held a P license in 3 states. I designed flood mitigation infrastructure for municipalities that most people drive through without thinking twice. I have never once asked to be thanked for anything I have built. That night, in the basement of my own lake house, I decided that was the last thing I would ever not ask for. I didn't make a sound. I didn't go upstairs. I lay on that cot, listened to the water heater click, and I began to plan. I want to tell you who I was before that weekend. Not because I need your sympathy, but because the math matters. You cannot understand what I did without understanding what I had given. I purchased the lake house in the summer of 2009. The market had softened and I had been disciplined. 12 years of living below my means on an engineer's salary, driving a truck I bought used, taking exactly 1 vacation per year, packing lunches. The property was 4 acres on Lake Lure in western North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a covered dock, a fire pit, and a view of the water that made every sensible financial argument I'd ever made feel completely worth it. I paid cash. My wife, Carol, cried when I handed her the keys. She said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for her. Her mother, Patrice, stood in the driveway and said it was a lot of upkeep for a second home. I noted that, the way you note weather before a storm. For 14 years I maintained that property. I re-roofed it in 2013 after a storm took out a section over the back bedroom. I rebuilt the dock in 2017. Pulled the permits myself, poured 2 of the footings with my own hands on a Saturday in October when the water was cold enough to make your knuckles ache. I winterized it every November. I drove up alone, drained the pipes, covered the furniture, latched the shutters. I drove home the same day. Carol didn't come for winterization weekends. Nobody did. That was fine. That was mine. I hosted the family reunion every July 4th for 11 of those 14 years. I bought the fireworks. I bought the groceries. I grilled for 18 people without being asked and without complaint. I replaced a water pump the morning of the 2018 reunion because it failed at 6 a.m. and I didn't want anyone's shower to be cold. I fixed it before anyone else woke up. I never mentioned it. Carol's family, her mother Patrice, her sister Renee, Renee's husband Greg, their 3 teenagers, and whichever cousin happened to be between situations that particular summer, came every year. They arrived with coolers and opinions. They left with leftovers and nothing done to help. Greg, specifically. I want you to hold on to that name because it matters later. Greg Hollis had never held a job longer than 3 years. He sold insurance for a while. Then he consulted, which as far as I could tell meant he talked about consulting. He drove a leased truck 2 trims above what made sense for a man with his balance sheet, wore sunglasses indoors, and had a laugh that arrived about 2 seconds before anything was actually funny. A laugh designed to make you feel like the room was his. Every summer, Greg arrived at my lake house and behaved as though he had built it. He assigned the kayaks. He decided when the fire pit got lit. He poured drinks with the authority of a man who believed ownership was a matter of confidence rather than deed. And every summer I let him. Because Carol's family was Carol's family. Because the weekend was short. Because I am, by nature, a man who builds things quietly and does not require a plaque. That was the version of me they had always known. Patient, accommodating, present. They had confused my patience for weakness for 14 years. The summer of 2023 would be the last time they made that mistake. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. If you are new here, this channel is for the ones who showed up, held it together, and never made it about themselves. Grab your coffee. Settle in. This one takes a minute. But it lands exactly where you think it's going to land. The disrespect at the lake house had never been dramatic. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. There was no single moment before that weekend that I could point to and say, there, that was the line. It was a collection of small things. A sediment. Something that builds on a riverbed over years until the flow changes and you don't know exactly when it happened. You only know the river doesn't run the same anymore. The first summer, 2009, Patrice told Carol that the kitchen needed better organization 2 days after we bought the house. She said it to Carol, not to me, in my presence, as though I were a feature of the room rather than the man who had purchased it. 2011. Greg started the grill without asking. It was a ceramic Kamadou I had brought up from home. A good one I knew how to operate at temperature. He ran it too hot for 40 minutes and warped the gasket. He didn't mention it. I found it the following November during winterization, alone the way I found most things. 2014. Renee redecorated the guest bathroom. I'm not being hyperbolic. She bought a new mirror, a new towel set, and a wicker basket with artificial eucalyptus, drove it up from Charlotte, and installed it without a word. When I came upstairs and saw it, Carol said, "Doesn't it look nice?" I said it did. I took the old mirror down to the storage room in the basement and set it against the wall, where it stayed for 9 years. 2016. Greg told his brother-in-law at the fire pit that the dock needed a professional to look at it the same summer I had rebuilt it by hand. His brother-in-law nodded seriously. Neither of them had ever touched a post-hole digger in their lives. 2019. Patrice began referring to the lake house as our place. Not maliciously, conversationally, casually. When we're at our place this summer, I heard it 3 times that weekend. Carol heard it too and said nothing. I said nothing. I filed it. I didn't know it yet, but the filing was the beginning of the end. By 2022, something had quietly shifted in the family's geography of the house. Renee and Greg had begun arriving a day early. To get settled, Renee explained once, as though settling required additional runway. They took the master suite. Every year. Without discussion. Carol and I were in the second bedroom, which was fine. It was our house. Any room was fine. Patrice took the third bedroom. The arrangement had calcified into assumption. In the spring of 2023, Carol mentioned that her cousin Brandon, a 34-year-old man who had lived in 4 states in 6 years, would be joining the reunion that July. He needed a little stability, Carol said. He was going through something. I asked where he would sleep. Carol said the couch pulled out. I said that was fine. It was not fine, but I said it was. The week before the July 4th weekend, I drove up alone as usual to open the house. I turned on the water, checked the dock lines, restocked the pantry, put fresh propane on the grill. I made up the beds. 3 bedrooms, fresh linens on all of them, pillows straight, the good towels in the bathrooms. Then I drove home. Carol drove up the following Friday with her mother. I drove up Saturday morning. When I arrived, the driveway held Greg's lease truck, Renee's SUV, Patrice's Buick, and Brandon's car. A late model something with a cracked windshield and a bumper sticker I couldn't read from a distance and didn't want to. I walked in through the back door the way I always did. The master suite was closed. I could hear Greg on the other side of it on a phone call, laughing his early laugh. The second bedroom, our bedroom, Carol's and mine, held Renee's bags on the chair, Renee's toiletries on the nightstand, Renee's sandals at the foot of the bed. The third bedroom held Patrice. Brandon was on the couch with his duffel bag and his cracked windshield energy and an expression of mild apology that suggested he knew something I didn't yet know. Carol came out of the kitchen holding a dish towel. She looked at me. Then she looked at the floor. She said, "We thought you could take the basement. Just for the weekend. Renee needed the room for her back. And I didn't want to bother you about it before you drove up. I want you to sit with that sentence." I had driven 2.5 hours. I had opened the house alone the week before. I had replaced the dock lines in October. I had paid the property taxes in March. I had held the P license that paid for every square foot of that structure. I didn't want to bother you about it. I nodded. I picked up my bag. I went downstairs. I sat on the cot next to the water heater. I did not go back upstairs that night. Part 5. The Breaking Point. Public Humiliation Climax. The next morning was July 4th. I was up at 6. I showered in the utility sink area. There was a small half bath at the back of the basement, installed by the previous owners, functional but not finished. I dressed. I went upstairs. The kitchen was already occupied. Patrice was at the counter making coffee with the unhurried authority of a woman in her own home. Greg was on the back deck with his feet on the railing, phone in hand. Renee was organizing the refrigerator, reorganizing it, actually, removing the groceries I had stocked and redistributing them according to a logic that was entirely hers. Nobody said good morning first. I poured coffee from the pot Patrice had made in the machine I owned, in the kitchen I had purchased, in the house I had built a dock for with my own hands in October water, and I sat at the table and I looked at the lake. It was a clear morning. The water was flat. A heron stood on the neighbor's dock in the early light, absolutely still, watching something beneath the surface with total, patient, locked in focus. I thought, that bird knows something the fish doesn't know yet. Around 10 o'clock, Carol's cousin Brandon, who had never been to the lake house before, who was sleeping on a pull-out couch, who had a cracked windshield, walked out onto the back deck and said to Greg, loudly enough for the kitchen to hear, "Man, this place is great. You guys did good." Greg said, "Thanks, man. Yeah, it's been in the family a while." I was standing at the kitchen window. I heard every word. Carol was 2 feet from me, slicing watermelon. She heard it too. She did not correct it. She set down the knife, picked up a piece of watermelon, and walked to the back door to offer it to Greg and Brandon. She said nothing. I finished my coffee. I rinsed my mug in the sink. I walked to the back bedroom. The basement stairs were through a door near the laundry, and I sat on the edge of the cot next to the water heater and I looked at the floor. What Greg said was not the wound. I need you to understand that. What Greg said was ignorant and Greg was ignorant, and that was a known quantity. I had 14 years of data on Greg. What Carol did, what Carol didn't do, in that moment at the kitchen window, that was the wound. 2 feet away, knife in hand. And she said nothing. I had given 14 years of mornings like the one I described. 14 years of November drives. 14 years of the dock and the roof and the propane and the permits and the groceries and the silence about the reorganized bathroom and the warped gasket and the early laugh and Patrice saying our place. And in the moment that cost her nothing, 10 words, 5 seconds, actually Daniel owns it, she had chosen not to spend them. I didn't go back upstairs until the fireworks started. I watched them from the dock, alone, in a folding chair I'd bought at a hardware store 6 years ago and carried down the bank myself. I watched the sky over Lake Lure turn red and gold and white. And I made my decision. I want to be clear about the decision. It was not emotional. I did not make it in anger, and I did not make it to hurt anyone. I made it the way I make every structural decision, by looking at what the thing is actually doing versus what it was designed to do. The lake house was designed to be a place where I could be still, where I could hear water, where I could work with my hands and sit on a dock and feel that the years of discipline had produced something real and quiet and mine. It had become something else. It had become a venue, a family property that belonged, in every practical sense of the word, to people who had never paid $1 toward it or lifted a hand for it. I was not the owner of the lake house. I was the underwriter. That is not a sustainable structure. Any engineer will tell you that. I did not tell Carol that night. I did not tell anyone. I drove home the morning of July 5th. I said I had a site visit Monday, which was true, and I stopped at a coffee shop in Rutherford and sat at a corner table and did 4 things. First, I called my attorney. His name is Warren Chu, and he has handled my business contracts for 11 years. I left him a voicemail that said, simply, "Warren, I need to talk to you about the lake house. Not an emergency. Call me this week." Second, I called a real estate broker I had worked with in the Asheville market, a woman named Sandra Price who had sold 2 investment properties for me in 2017. I told her I was thinking about the lake house. I asked her what the market looked like. She told me, "I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters later." Third, I opened the Notes app on my phone and began a document I titled simply, Log. I wrote down everything I could remember with dates where I had them, of every repair, every winterization trip, every purchase, every morning I had driven up alone. I wrote for 40 minutes. I had a better memory for this than I expected. Grief has a way of sharpening the archive. Fourth, I finished my coffee. I drove home. I was calm, controlled. Lighter, actually, the way you feel when a decision has been made and the only thing left is execution. I didn't know it yet, but Carol would not find out for 63 days. Warren called me the following Tuesday. I walked him through the situation plainly. The property was purchased in my name alone. This was not an accident. It was how I handled all major assets, a practice I'd maintained since my first property purchase in 2003. Carol was not on the deed. There were no co-ownership documents, no recorded agreements, nothing that complicated what I was about to do. Warren said, "Daniel, this is straightforward. You want to list it?" I said yes. He said, "Do you want to wait until you've had a conversation with Carol?" I said, "I'll have that conversation. I'd like the listing ready when I do." He said he'd have the paperwork drafted by Friday. Sandra had already run comps. The market on Lake Lure had moved considerably since 2009. Pandemic-era migration had driven lakefront property in western North Carolina to levels that, frankly, I had not fully tracked. She sent me a comparative market analysis with an estimated list price that made me sit down. I had paid cash for the property in 2009. I had put an additional $70,000 into it over 14 years, the roof, the dock rebuild, 2 HVAC upgrades, the kitchen renovation in 2015, various systems and repairs I had absorbed without event. Sandra's number was 4 times what I had paid. 4 times. What they didn't know was that every November I had spent alone up there. Every propane tank, every permit pulled and every footing poured had been compounding in a market they had never once thought to pay attention to. I listed it on a Thursday in September. Sandra ran a quiet pre-market campaign, targeted to buyers already active in the Lake Lure and Chimney Rock corridor, people with capital looking for a move-in-ready lakefront property with a rebuilt dock and a clear title. We had 3 offers within 10 days. 2 were above asking. I accepted the strongest offer on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in my truck in a parking lot outside a county permit office when Sandra called with the number. I said, "Take it." Then I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes and watched people walk in and out of the building, and I thought about the water heater that clicked every 40 minutes. I called Carol that evening. I told her I had sold the lake house. I told her it was in my name, had always been in my name, and the sale was under contract. I told her the closing date. I did not raise my voice. I did not list grievances. I did not mention Greg or Brandon or the fitted sheet on the storage bin. I stated facts. I told her I thought it was time. I told her I was sorry she was hearing it this way. She said, "You can't do that." I said, "Carol, I've already done it." That was the last time I would ever have that particular kind of conversation. The kind where someone tells me what I can and cannot do with something I built and paid for and maintained alone. She hung up. I sat in the parking lot another few minutes. Then I drove to a job site to check on a crew. The calls started that night. Carol. Then Patrice. Then Renee. Greg did not call, I noted that. A man who assigns kayaks and lights fires and tells guests that a lake house has been in the family a while did not, when the actual mechanics of ownership became relevant, find his voice. I noted that completely. I did not answer any of the calls. I texted Carol once, on the 3rd day, "I'll talk when you're ready to have a calm conversation. I'm not avoiding you. I'm protecting the process." She did not respond for 11 days. During those 11 days, Patrice called 6 times. Renee called 4 times and sent 2 texts, one of which said, "Daniel, this is not just your decision to make," which was legally and factually and in every way that matters incorrect. I did not respond to either text. I worked. I ran. I ate well. I slept better than I had in years. A thing I noticed with some interest, the way you notice when a sound you've gotten used to suddenly stops and the quiet feels unfamiliar and then, after a few nights, feels like the most natural thing in the world. Brandon sent a single text that said, "Hey man, heard about the house. That sucks." I did not respond to Brandon. The closing was scheduled for a Friday in October, 46 days after the list. Sandra called it one of the cleaner transactions she'd run in the Lake Lure corridor in years. Clear title, move-in condition, motivated buyer, no contingency drama. What Renee didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already identified what I was going to do with the capital. I had been working with Warren and a financial planner named Ochoa for 3 weeks. The plan was clear, properly structured, and entirely mine. I drove up to the house alone the Thursday before closing. I wanted one more morning on that dock. I got there before sunrise. I made coffee on the stove, the burner clicked 4 times before it caught, the same way it had always clicked, and I carried my mug down the bank to the dock. I sat in the folding chair. The water was still. A heron landed on the far bank and stood there in the gray light, watching. I sat with the house at my back and the lake in front of me, and I thought about the water heater in the basement, clicking through the night, and I thought about what it had cost me to be patient, and I thought about what the patience had built. Then the sun came up over the ridge and caught the water, and it was extraordinary. I went inside. I locked the doors. I drove home. I am going to give you numbers, not to impress you, because this channel is for people who need to know that the math works, that walking away from what is being taken from you is not loss, it is reallocation. The lake house closed at 4 times my original purchase price. After 14 years of improvements and carrying costs, my net gain on the transaction was significant. Warren structured the proceeds carefully. Ochoa mapped the deployment. Within 90 days of closing, I had done 3 things. First, I purchased a condominium in Asheville outright. 12th floor, south-facing, views of the Black Mountains. A kitchen I designed with a contractor I had worked with on commercial projects for 8 years. No one will reorganize that kitchen. No one will rearrange the bathroom. No one will be assigned a room in it by anyone other than me. Second, I set aside a dedicated capital allocation for a commercial property I had been watching in the Swannanoa Valley. A small mixed-use building with 2 ground-floor retail tenants and a residential unit above. The numbers had never quite worked before. The lake house proceeds made them work. Warren and I closed on that property in February. Cash flows from day 1. Third, I funded a solo engineering consultancy I had been drafting in a notebook for 4 years and never launched because the timing had never felt right. The timing felt right. Within 6 months, I had 3 municipal contracts, 2 drainage infrastructure projects, and 1 flood assessment study. The consultancy cleared more in its first year than I had expected to see in year 2. I am not telling you I became a different person. I am telling you I became the person I had been funding for 14 years while running someone else's reunion. Carol and I separated formally in the spring following the sale. The process was, given the asset structure, uncomplicated. I was fair. I am not interested in prolonged conflict. I am interested in clean lines and clear documentation. We have not spoken in 8 months. I run in the mornings now, along the French Broad River Trail near my building. I cook my own dinners. I sit on the condo balcony on clear nights and look at the mountains, and I feel, this is the only word for it, spacious. Like a room that has been cleared of furniture that was never quite right and you forgot how much floor there was. Greg, as far as I know, still leases the truck. Here is what I want to leave you with. Patience is not the same as permission. Every year that I drove up alone and fixed what was broken and said nothing and drove home, I was not being strong. I was being available. I had made myself an infrastructure, reliable, invisible, load-bearing, the kind of thing people only notice when it fails. The lake house did not make me unhappy. The lake house was a beautiful thing that I built and cared for and was quietly taken from me by people who understood, correctly, that I would never make it a problem. They were right for 14 years. They were wrong about the 15th. What I learned, the thing I will carry, is that the moment you stop performing patience, you do not disappear. You arrive. The version of yourself that has been funding the life everyone else was living steps forward, and he is not angry, and he is not broken, and he is not asking for an apology. He has already moved on. He just wanted one morning on the dock first. If the story found you, it found you for a reason. You know what it feels like to pour the coffee and fix the dock and drive home alone and say it's fine. You are not required to keep saying that. This channel exists for the moment you decide to stop. Subscribe if you're in the middle of that decision. Leave a comment if you've already made it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Dad's sweet revenge. We'll see you in the next one.